Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Mike's blood froze when he turned to face the white Peterbilt to his left. There was nothing at all in the driver's seat. The truck was operating on its own. Mike's hands were shaking as he reached for his CB microphone. Fox in the desert. That truck is not being driven. The taxi is deserted. That isn't feasible. Trucks are not self-driving. No one is in that taxi. I assure you, no one. For some minutes, Mike remained parallel to the white Peterbilt, taking in every aspect. To keep the truck centered in the lane, the steering wheel was spinning on its own and making small adjustments as the truck negotiated a small hill. The gear shifter moved by itself. The windshield, however, was the most unsettling of all. The whole cab was empty, and Mike could see right through it. No one, no driver, no passenger. The white Peterbilt suddenly started to move toward Mike's direction. Mike had to swerve to avoid a collision, first slowly, and then more forcefully, his trailer swinging dangerously as he struggled to keep it under control. "He's attempting to drive me crazy," Mike yelled into his cover receiver. "Who? The white truck? Yes, he's directly approaching me." Mike sped up, overtaking both trucks in the process. He could see in his mirrors that Desert Fox and the white Peterbilt had returned to formation. As though nothing had happened, the two trucks kept traveling down the highway at precisely the same speed. "I'll use my satellite phone to make a call to the Nevada Highway Patrol." "Desert Fox, this is incorrect." "Well thought out. This is plenty for me." Mike called the Nevada Highway Patrol's emergency number. A dispatcher replied after a few rings. "This is Maria from Highway Patrol." "What emergency do you have?" "Mike Rodriguez is this person. Near mile marker 140 on eastbound Highway 50. I drive a truck. There's a problem out here." For nearly an hour, a white Peterbilt vehicle, without a driver, has been harassing another trucker. A pause occurred. "Sir, did you say no driver?" "Yes, exactly. The truck is driving itself, but the cab is empty. Another driver has been being paced by it, and it simply attempted to drive me off the road." "Please stay on the line, sir. I am sending a unit to your address." "Could you explain the truck?" "Peterbilt, white. It appears to be a model from the 1980s. However, it is in excellent shape. No dot numbers, no corporate markings. It is towing an unmarked white trailer." "Where are you right now?" Mike checked his GPS. Still traveling east at mile marker 142. The Unit 47 is en route. About 20 minutes is the estimated time of arrival. Are you able to keep your eyes on the suspicious car? "Yes, it is visible to me. It continues to run next to the other truck." Mike stayed on the road and followed the two trucks for the next 15 minutes. The Highway Patrol dispatcher on the phone. The white Peterbilt never veered off course, varied its speed, or displayed any other characteristics of typical human driving. It resembled seeing a machine go along a predetermined path. Then, when Mike's rearview mirror showed the oncoming patrol car's flashing lights, an extraordinary event occurred. The white Peterbilt just disappeared, not slowly, not by veering off the road, but all at once. It vanished after a brief period of existence. Where has Desert Fox disappeared to? I'm not sure. There he was, and then he simply vanished. About a mile down the road, Sergeant James Walsh of the Nevada Highway Patrol stopped both trucks. He radioed for support and used powerful spotlights to search the area for more than an hour after getting statements from both drivers. They discovered nothing, no car debris, no tire tracks going off the road, and no sign of the white Peterbilt. In 22 years of patrol work, this is unlike anything I've ever seen. Mike was informed later that Desert Fox, whose real name was Carl Henderson, had been so traumatized by the experience that he quit long-haul trucking and accepted a local delivery job in Reno. Sergeant Walsh said, "But I believe what you're telling me. You're both clearly shaken, and your stories match perfectly. Highway 50 was never driven by him again." The tale doesn't stop there, though. When Mike began asking other truckers about their experiences on Highway 50, he was horrified by what he learned. At least a dozen drivers have reported seeing a white Peterbilt that seemed to drive itself during the previous 30 years. It paced them, according to some, for several hours. Some claimed it attempted to eject them from the road. In each instance, when police arrived, the truck would disappear completely. Tommy Kowalski, a seasoned truck driver who had been operating Highway 50 since the 1980s, provided the most terrifying information. He informed Mike of a deadly mishap that happened in 1987 when a white Peterbilt struck a family station wagon close to mile marker 135 in a head-on collision. 3 family members and the truck driver were killed instantly. For no apparent reason, the truck abruptly crossed the middle line while it was heading east. Robert Bobby Henshaw, a 34-year-old truck driver from Utah with a flawless safety record and 12 years of driving experience, was the driver. The accident's cause was never identified. Toxicology testing revealed that Henshaw had no drugs or alcohol in his system, and his truck was discovered to be in fine mechanical condition. The cause was reported as unknown in the official report. Mike attempted to confirm this account using documents from the Nevada Department of Transportation, but the 1987 files had been destroyed in a warehouse fire in 2003. He did, however, discover a small reference to the accident in an Eli Daily Times article from 1987, which validated the fundamental information Tommy had given. Mike has driven Highway 50 numerous times since his encounter in 2019, but he has never spotted the white Peterbilt again. He has spoken with other truckers who have gone through similar things. It is always late at night, between mile marks 130 and 150, and it always describes a spotless white Peterbilt without a driver. Although Sergeant Walsh, who is now retired, acknowledges in private that he has gotten similar calls at least 6 times in his career, the Nevada Highway Patrol has not taken an official stance on the reports. Responding authorities never discovered the enigmatic truck. Mike's routine has changed permanently, but he still drives large distances. He no longer drives alone at night on Highway 50. At least 2 additional trucks always accompany him on his journey. Additionally, he never turns off his CB radio, because 37 years after his passing, Bobby Henshaw is still traveling the same path in the Nevada desert on the most desolate road in the United States. Forever stuck in the never-ending night of Highway 50, unable to stop or rest, to the weeping Interstate 40 woman having driven trucks for 23 years. Danny Kowalski took great satisfaction in his ability to tackle any challenge that came his way. The 45-year-old Detroit native had witnessed collisions, mechanical failures, and all types of weather, but nothing had prepared him for what transpired on a foggy October night in 2018 on Interstate 40 in Oklahoma. The time was 2:47 a.m. moment. She was initially caught in Danny's headlights due to construction delays in Missouri. He was around 2 hours behind schedule while transporting a load of auto parts from Michigan to Texas. He had to slow down to 45 miles per hour on the usually congested freeway because the fog had drifted in after midnight, lowering visibility to perhaps 50 feet, about 20 feet from the guardrail. She was standing on the eastbound lane's shoulder. A woman with long dark hair that hung loosely around her shoulders was wearing what appeared to be a white outfit. Danny could tell she was crying despite the dense fog as she faced the highway. Sobs were trembling through her entire body. Danny immediately wanted to stop and offer assistance. Throughout his trucking career, he had made numerous stops to help stranded drivers. But he was hesitant about this woman for some reason. Other than sobbing, she was standing motionless. Furthermore, there was not a single wrecked vehicle in the area. She had no jacket, no pocketbook, and no other explanation for why she was by herself on the freeway at almost 3 in the morning. He reached for his CB. "This is Danny from Motor City, eastbound on I-40 near Breaker 9 points to 38 miles. Is there anyone else here who sees a woman on the shoulder?" The cab was silent for a few seconds before someone spoke. "Danny, this is Roadrunner, 10 miles behind you. Which woman are you referring to?" A white-dressed woman standing on the sobbing on the right shoulder. "She appears to be in need of assistance, yet something about it doesn't feel right. When I get there, I'll keep an eye out." "You dial 911. Danny thought about it. "I will definitely call them. This doesn't appear to be typical. As he passed the woman, he kept one eye on her and used his satellite phone to ring 911. She never raised her head. She kept sobbing while keeping her face buried in her hands, without acknowledging his truck. After receiving his information, the dispatcher for the Oklahoma Highway Patrol assured him that a unit would be sent to check on her. However, after 20 minutes, Danny's radio crackled once more. "This is Roadrunner, Danny from Motor City. I recently went by mile marker 238. There isn't a woman here, my friend." Shoulders are vacant. Danny scowled. "Are you certain?" There she was, as plain as day. Long dark hair, a white outfit, and tears in her eyes. "Danny, nothing here." Perhaps someone picked her up. Perhaps, however, Danny felt uneasy about it. After passing her, he had been keeping an eye on his mirrors and had not noticed any other cars. There was nowhere to go anyhow, and the fog was too dense for her to have walked very far. 4 miles in both ways, Interstate 40 sliced across barren farmland. Danny refueled and got coffee at a truck stop in Oklahoma City 3 hours later. At the gas pumps, he was conversing with another driver when the man said something that chilled Dit to the bone. "Did you hear about last night's I-40 accident?" Regarding mile marker 238, the driver inquired. A woman crossed the street directly in front of a semi. The fog made it impossible for the driver to halt. Danny began to shake his hands. "What? How did she appear?" "I don't know all the specifics, but according to the press, she had long, dark hair and was dressed in a white outfit." Approximately 3:30 a.m. Truly tragic. Taking out his phone, Danny looked up local news. The Oklahoma City News website had it. A woman passes away in a traffic collision. Although it was short, the piece verified the information. At around 3:30 a.m., Maria Santos, 28, of Oklahoma City, was killed by a semi-trailer on eastbound I-40 close to mile marker 238. She had long dark hair and was dressed in a white dress. The truck driver's name was not disclosed. Freed was not prosecuted because it appeared that the woman had stepped straight into traffic while there was a lot of fog. About 45 minutes before Maria Santos passed away, Danny knew he had seen her, but it was impossible. At 2:47 a.m., he had witnessed her standing on the shoulder sobbing. The news report stated that she passed away around 3:30 a.m., which implied that, unless he had seen something else totally, she hadn't even been struck when he saw her. Despite his best efforts, Danny couldn't stop thinking about that night for the next few weeks. He began by asking other truck drivers if they had encountered any oddities while traveling on I-40 in Oklahoma. The majority merely shook their heads, but others gave him glances that suggested they were more knowledgeable than they actually were, stating, at a truck stop in Arkansas, he was finally called aside by an old-timer named Pete Garrison. Pete said in a low voice. You asking about that crying woman on I-40? In the last 5 years, you've seen her 3 times, in the same location. I phoned the police the first time I saw her, but they never found anything. But I saw her the night the woman was slain. She always wore a white dress, had long dark hair, and was crying as if her heart had been ripped out. That woman, Maria Santos, wasn't the first. After my second sighting, I looked into it and found that 4 women had been slain at that precise location in the previous 8 years. Pete's face darkened. Danny, I have some awful news for you. 4 women, all in fog, all dressed in white dresses, all between 2 and 4 in the morning. Danny felt ill. Rebecca Martinez, 2010. It's implausible that Jessica Chen in 2013, Amanda Forster in 2016, and Maria Santos in 2018 simply walked out in front of vehicles without leaving a suicide note or any other explanation. I started looking into it because I felt that people don't just decide to walk into traffic for no reason. I discovered that there was a pattern. All of these ladies had recently split up with their partners, and they were nasty breakups. You think someone's forcing them out there. I think someone's luring them out there. And I think whatever's happening, it's still happening, because I've seen that crying woman twice since. Danny remained silent for a long time. The kind of guy that threatens to hurt them if they try to leave. Danny couldn't sleep that night because he kept thinking about Pete's words, the pattern of deaths, and the woman he'd seen standing on the shoulder. The most recent death was Maria Santos, who passed away just last month. The following morning, he called the Oklahoma Highway Patrol and requested to talk to someone about the I-40 accidents. We've had several reports of a woman in white standing on the shoulder near mile marker 238, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., said Sergeant Linda Martinez, who had no connection to the victim, was willing to speak, but was unable to provide many details. About ongoing investigations, do you believe there is a connection to the accidents? Off the record, I do, but I can't prove it. The odd thing is that we have witnesses who observed the woman on the shoulder prior to each accident, but we never find anyone despite sending units out every time in foggy weather. I mean, people describe seeing her before she's actually there, like you did, and you saw her at 2:47 a.m., but the timing never makes sense, sometimes 30 minutes before, sometimes an hour before. Danny didn't have an answer, but he began avoiding I-40 in Oklahoma, taking longer routes to avoid that stretch of highway, and he warned other truckers about his experience. However, according to her roommate, Maria Santos didn't even leave her apartment until 3:15 a.m., was talking to a guy, Carlos Mendoza, who drives I-40 regularly, and he has been keeping a journal of every time he sees that crying woman. 6 months later, Danny received a call from Pete Garrison, telling him to be especially cautious near mile marker 238. Danny, you need to hear this. In the last year, he has seen her 11 times, all in the fog, and usually between 2 and 4 in the morning. The unsettling aspect is that Carlos began shooting pictures of her. Danny, he has clear shots of a woman in white sobbing on her shoulder, but when he shows them to others, they only show an empty shoulder. I requested Carlos to email me pictures since I believed it was impossible. I glanced at them on my computer and could see her clearly, but when I showed them to my wife, she stated there was nothing there. 2 weeks later, Danny was driving I-40 eastbound, trying to get to Dallas before his delivery deadline. There, just fog and pavement, Danny felt a chill go down his spine. What are you saying? I'm saying whatever that thing is. Only truckers can see it, and I think it's trying to tell us something. It was 2:15 a.m. Fog was beginning to sweep in, and Danny's CB radio crackled to life. Mile marker 237. He had intended to take a different route, but construction delays had forced him back onto the dreaded section of highway. This is Smokey Okie Joe at mile marker 240. All eastbound traffic. I have a woman in white on the shoulder up ahead, and she's crying quite a bit. Can you see this? Danny's fists are clenched on the steering wheel. This is Motor City Danny. Smokey Joe. I'm approximately. Danny checked his speedometer and thought, whatever you do, don't stop. Call 911 and keep driving. Why? She looks like she needs help. Trust me on this one. At mile marker 238, his headlights picked up a familiar figure, the woman in white, standing on the shoulder, crying. But this time something was different. She was staring straight at his truck, her mouth moving, and the fog reduced to 40 mph each beach. I think she's trying to warn us about something. Smokey Okie Joe, you still there? Yeah, just past her. Calling 911 now. Good. Danny grabbed his CB. The woman was pointing frantically toward the eastbound lanes ahead, tears streaming down her face, and he could see her lips forming words as he drove past her, but he couldn't hear anything over the sound of the engine. Then Danny noticed why. A car was stopped in the right lane with no hazard lights, completely invisible in the fog, about half a mile ahead. If Smokey Okie Joe, Danny reached for his radio and said, Smokey Joe, you need to get in the left lane right now. No lights, no warning. You need to dead stop in the right lane about half a mile ahead of you. Had he not slowed down after seeing the woman, he would have crashed straight into it. It was totally invisible in the dense fog until you were directly on top of it. But the Oklahoma Highway Patrol later confirmed that they had discovered an abandoned car or right lane or mile marker 239, where the driver had apparently run out of gas and left without installing any warning devices. Thank you, Danny. Jesus, I nearly hit it. Since that night, Danny has driven I-40 through Oklahoma numerous times, and he has seen the crying woman 6 more times, always in the fog, always close to mile marker 238. The woman had not been attempting to lure anyone to their death, rather, she had been warning them about danger ahead. Perhaps she had been trying to warn people all along, but only the truckers who had died had been able to see her. Danny now believes that Maria Santos and the other women who perished on that stretch of highway are still there, attempting to prevent others from suffering the same fate. They appear to truckers because truckers are the ones most likely to encounter hazards like a disabled vehicle, debris in the road, or construction equipment left behind. Each time he has been able to warn other drivers in time to avoid disaster. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol still receives reports of the sobbing woman, but they no longer respond with the same urgency because they know that when truckers see her, they need to look for hazards ahead and warn other drivers. It has become an unofficial early warning system staffed by the spirits of women. They are likely to be there to help, likely to have CB radios to warn others, and most likely to be driving through that area in the middle of the night when the dangers are greatest. Danny keeps a picture of Maria Santos on his dashboard, along with pictures of the other 3 women who perished on I-40. He views them as his guardian angels, keeping watch over him and his fellow truckers on the most isolated parts of the American highway system. People who died trying to avoid their own dangers are now spending eternity trying to help others avoid theirs. If he sees the woman crying, he says the hitchhiker on Route 666, Tom Big Dog Williams, a 52-year-old trucker from Bakersfield, had been hauling freight across the Southwest for 18 years and believed he knew every mile of asphalt between Los Angeles and Albuquerque. He said in a quiet prayer of gratitude for the warning and the bravery of the women who refused to let others die the way they did. However, nothing had helped him prepare for what transpired on the old stretch of Route 666 in New Mexico the early hours of September 15, 2020. The road had been renumbered to Route 491 back in 2003 due to the numerous accidents, vandalism, and odd incidents associated with the Devil's Highway. But Tom was running late on a delivery to Gallup, and his GPS had led him onto the old highway. It was 3:22 a.m. when Tom's headlights first illuminated the figure standing on the shoulder, A man in his 30s, wearing a faded denim jacket and jeans with his headlights. He reasoned that he had driven worse roads, and that the fuel savings from taking a more direct route would help his bottom line. Tom had stopped picking up hitchhikers years ago, overhearing too many horror stories from other drivers, so his first instinct was to keep driving. But something about this man, perhaps his posture, made him slow down. He was tall and thin, with dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the truck's headlights. At 3 a.m., he stood completely motionless, not moving or looking about like most hitchhikers did when they heard a car approaching. Or perhaps it was the fact that there was not a single broken-down automobile in sight, or that there was no reason why someone would be standing by themselves on this lonely section of highway. After putting his truck in park and pulling over about 50 yards past the hitchhiker, Tom noticed that the man in his side mirror was still standing there with his thumb out, not approaching the truck. He waited for a full minute after this, but the hitchhiker didn't move. That's weird, Tom thought to himself. Static filled the cab for a few seconds before a gruff voice said, "This is Desert Rat about 20 miles behind you, big dog." "What hitchhiker are you?" He reached for his CB radio. "Breaker 1 This is Big Dog northbound on Route 666 near mile marker 47. Does anyone else out here see a hitchhiker? What are you talking about?" A man in a denim jacket is standing on the shoulder, sticking out his thumb. He seems really pale, but oddly, he isn't approaching my truck. "I'll watch. Do you pick him up?" Something ain't right about this guy, so I'm going to keep driving. Tom put the truck in motion and headed south, but when he checked in his mirror again, the hitchhiker was still standing in the same place, still putting his thumb out, and still not moving. 20 minutes later, Tom's radio crackled again. "Big Dog, this is Desert Rat." He watched the hitchhiker in his mirrors as he drove away, but the man never turned to watch the truck leave, never dropped his thumb, and never moved instead. He stood there like a mannequin until the darkness engulfed him. "I had just passed mile marker 47. You sure?" He was right there on the shoulder, clear as day. "Nothing here, Big Dog. Perhaps he was picked up." "Ain't no hitchhiker out here, buddy," Tom scowled. The hitchhiker had been standing there when Tom lost sight of him, but he had been watching his mirrors and had not seen any other cars. At this hour, Route 666 was almost deserted, with maybe one car every 10 or 15 minutes. Tom tried to ignore it, but 30 miles later, his headlights picked up another figure on the shoulder, the same man in the same denim jacket, standing in the same position with his thumb out. No one could have gone 30 meters in 20 minutes without a car, certainly not through the desert that bordered Route 666. Tom slammed on his brakes, his heart racing. "Desert Rat, you still there?" Tom said, grabbing his CB. "I'm at mile marker 55. And I haven't seen any of that hitchhiker. So what's up, Big Dog?" "He's back, mile marker 77. Same person, same jacket, same everything. Hitchhiker." Tom gazed at the man in his headlights. It was unquestionably the same man, but he had changed. His skin had become thinner, his clothes more faded, and something was off with his eyes. "Big Dog, you there?" Desert Rat's voice came over the radio. "Yeah, I'm here. This guy. Something's wrong with him. His eyes are glowing." They were reflecting the headlights like an animal's eyes burning with an unnatural light. The man's eyes were normal now, but he was still standing there, rigidly, with his thumb out, not moving toward the truck. Tom decided he had seen enough and pushed the pedal, continuing to go. "Come again." Tom blinked and looked again. Route 666 traveled through some of the most desolate areas, but 5 miles later, the hitchhiker was back, same location, same spot on the shoulder, same strange silence. Tom was beginning to panic, so he grabbed his cell phone to contact 911, but there was no coverage. Cell towers were few in the New Mexico desert. "I need you to call the police," Desert rat. This hitchhiker is following me in some way. He keeps showing up every few miles, and I don't think he's human. Big dog, are you okay? Perhaps you should stop. Tom kept driving, but now he was seeing the hitchhiker every 2 or 3 miles, always on the right shoulder, always with his thumb out, and get some rest. I'm okay. I know what I'm seeing. This guy keeps coming and going, and he's always in the same spot. Something's really wrong here. At mile marker 112, Tom made a choice. The man was always standing motionless, but he appeared increasingly wrong with each sighting. His skin grew paler, his clothes more faded, his eyes more reflective. By the 10th sighting, Tom could see that the man's jacket was torn and stained, with what appeared to be blood or oil. Hey, Tam screamed out, you need help or what? The hitchhiker was standing about 20 feet away, still in the same rigid position, and he decided to pull over and confront whatever it was. He grabbed a flashlight from his cap. The hitchhiker remained silent, didn't move and didn't even acknowledge Tom's presence. Tom approached, maintaining a flashlight beam focused on the figure, and as he approached within 10 feet, he could see that the man's face was horribly flawed. His skin was waxy and grey, his eyes were clouded, and his mouth was hanging open. Jesus, said Tom in a whisper. This was not a living being. It was a dead body. With an audible crack, the hitchhiker's head abruptly jerked toward Tom, his jaw widening as his clouded eyes stared at Tom's face. Tom's teeth turned black, and he heard a terrible sound coming from his throat. Not quite a scream, not quite. A moan that made his blood freeze. Tom sprinted back to his truck, locked the door, and heard the thing moving outside, its footsteps crunching on the gravel shoulder. Tom felt safe enough to breathe only after he crested a hill and lost sight of the hitchhiker, who was standing right behind his trailer, still holding his thumb out. But now his head was tilted at an impossible angle, as if his neck was broken. Tom floored the accelerator and sped away, but he could see the hitchhiker in his mirrors for a lot longer than should have been possible, because the figure appeared to be following the truck, gliding across the desert at the same speed Tom was driving. The horror didn't end there, though, as Tom encountered the hitchhiker at least a dozen more times over the course of the following 50 miles, each encounter more unsettling than the last. At times, the creature was holding its own severed head in place of its thumb. At other times, it was missing sections of its body. And at other times when Tom finally arrived in Gallup at dawn, he was trembling uncontrollably, so he checked into a motel and called in sick to his dispatcher, claiming to have food poisoning. He spent the day researching Route 666 online, and the information he discovered made his blood run cold. Near mile marker 47, in 1987, a 34-year-old drifter named Marcus Webb was killed while trying to hitchhike to California after being struck by a semi-truck and dragged for almost half a mile before the driver realized what had happened. This location has seen dozens of fatal accidents over the years, many of which involved hitchhikers who had been struck and killed by passing vehicles. One such case particularly caught Tom's attention. The police report stated that Webb's neck had been broken in the accident, which would account for the tilted head Tom had observed. But Tom discovered records of at least 8 other hitchhikers who had similar characteristics to Marcus Webb, including the same height, build, and denim jacket. The man's eyes were normal now, but he was still standing in that same rigid position, thumb extended, not moving toward the truck. Tom blinked and looked again, and realized that he had seen all the men killed on Route 666 over the previous 30 years, all between the ages of 25 and 40, all struck by vehicles while trying to get rides. Tom was beginning to panic, so he pressed the throttle and continued going. But 5 miles later, the hitchhiker was back the same place on the shoulder, the same posture, the same strange silence. He reached for his cell phone to make a call. "I need you to call the police, Desert Rat." This hitchhiker is following me somehow, showing up every few miles, and I don't think he's human. Big dog, are you feeling okay? 911. But there was no signal. Route 666 went through some of the most isolated deserts in New Mexico, and cell towers were few and far between. There's something seriously wrong here. Tom kept driving, but now he was seeing the hitchhiker every single time. Maybe you should stop and relax. I'm okay. I know what I'm seeing. This guy keeps coming and going, and he's always in the same spot. 2 or 3 miles, always on his right shoulder, always with his thumb out, always standing motionless. But the man's appearance got worse with each sighting. His skin getting paler, his clothes getting more faded, his eyes getting more reflective, and by the 10th sighting, Tom could see that his jacket was ripped and stained with what appeared to be blood or oil. The hitchhiker was standing about 20 feet away, still in that same stiff position, when Tom decided he was going to pull over and confront whatever it was. "Hey," Tom yelled out. The hitchhiker didn't react, didn't move, and didn't even acknowledge Tom's presence. Tom approached, maintaining a flashlight beam focused on the figure, and as he approached within 10 feet, he noticed a terrible problem with the man's face. His eyes were glazed over, his mouth was slightly open, and his skin was waxy and grey. "Jesus," Tom said. This wasn't a living person. This was a corpse. The hitchhiker's head abruptly and audibly cracked toward Tom. His mouth widened, exposing blackened teeth, and his clouded eyes stared at Tom's face. His throat made a sound. Something terrible that chilled Tom's blood, not quite a scream, not quite a moan. After sprinting back to his truck, Tom locked the door and slammed it. Outside, he could hear the creature's footsteps crunching on the gravel shoulder. The hitchhiker was standing right behind his trailer, still sticking out his thumb, but his head was cocked at an unbelievable position, as though his neck were broken. When Tom looked in his mirror, the hitchhiker was visible in Tom's mirrors for a much longer than it should have been, but he escaped the accelerator and drove off. At the same speed Tom was traveling, the figure appeared to be following the truck. It glided across the desert. Not until Tom reached the top of a hill did he feel secure enough to breathe after losing sight of the object. The nightmare, however, had not ended. Tom spotted the hitchhiker at least a dozen more times over the next 50 kilometers. Every apparition was more unsettling than the one before. Parts of the creature's body were occasionally absent. Occasionally, it held its own severed head in place of its thumb. At times, it was standing against gravity, upside down. Tom was trembling violently by the time he arrived in Gallup at dawn. He claimed to have food illness and called in sick to his dispatcher and checking into a motel. He looked up Route 666 online all day, and what he discovered chilled him to the bone. Over the years, the road had seen scores of deadly collisions, many of which included hitchhikers who were murdered by oncoming cars. Tom was particularly interested in one case. Marcus Webb, a 34-year-old vagabond, was killed in 1987 while trying to hitchhike to California, close to mile marker 47. A semi-truck had struck him, and before the driver understood what had happened, it had been pulled for over half a mile. Tom saw a hitchhiker who exactly fit Marcus Webb's description. Identical height, physique, and denim jacket. According to the police report, Tom saw Webb's head inclined, which may be explained by the fact that his neck had been fractured in the collision. Marcus Webb, however, was only one among many. At least 8 additional hitchhikers who had been slain on Route 666 in the previous 30 years were listed in Tom's archives. All of the males, all in the 25 to 40 age range, were hit by cars while attempting to seek a ride. 4 children of Dead Man's Curve. Over 12 years of driving West Virginia's mountain roads, Jake Morrison knew every bend of Route 19 at the back of his hand. Through the Appalachian Mountains, the 38-year-old Charleston truck driver had transported everything from coal to construction equipment, negotiating sharp turns and steep hills that would have scared off most drivers. However, nothing had prepared him for what transpired on a soggy November night in 2019 on Dead Man's Curve. Dead Man's Curve was a well-known stretch of Route 19 that took a dramatic S-curve around a cliff face approximately 15 miles south of Somersville. Over the previous 40 years, the bend had been the scene of numerous deadly incidents, earning it the moniker. Drivers who sped through the turn and plunged over the guardrail, crashing into the ravine below, were responsible for the majority of single-vehicle collisions. However, in some of the most unsettling incidents, drivers claimed to have swerved to avoid something in the road, but when investigators got there, they discovered nothing. The time was 11:47 p.m. moment Jake's headlights first caught sight of them, just before the abrupt left turn that marked the start of Dead Man's Curve. 3 little individuals were seen standing in the center of the northbound lane. Youngsters, about 8 or 9, dressed in what appeared to be pajamas or nightgowns. Their eyes were like mirrors, reflecting his headlights as they stood motionless in front of his approaching truck. Jake wanted to stop hard, but he was moving 45 meters per hour while carrying 40,000 pounds of steel beams. He was not helped by physics. Instead, as he struggled to stay clear of the kids, he jerked the steering wheel sharply to the left, felt his trailer start to jackknife. The trailer swung out as his truck went sideways across the damp pavement, toward the direction of the guardrail. For a horrifying instant, Jake believed he was losing it. Through his passenger window, he could see the ravine's darkness as the weight of the trailer changed, feel the truck tilt. The truck, however, straightened up immediately in front of the guardrail in an impossible way. Jake was able to recover, and his heart was beating so loudly that he could hear it over the diesel engine as he stepped over onto the narrow shoulder. For a few minutes, he sat there, trembling, trying to take in what had just transpired. Then, grabbing his flashlight, he went outside to see how the kids were doing. However, there was nothing when he returned to the spot where they had been. No bodies, no kids, no indication that anyone was in the road at one point. Jake used his flashlight to check the woods, the shoulders, and even the edge of the ravine as he made his way around Dead Man's Curve. He called out, thinking perhaps the kids had fled into the forest to hide, but all he got was the sound of his voice resonating off the walls of the cliff. He reached for his CB. This is Mountain Jake, heading north on Breaker 1 en Route 19 at Dead Man's Curve. Are the children in the road visible to anyone else? Before a voice answered, the air was static for a few seconds. Coal Runner is approximately 5 miles behind you, Jake. Which children are you referring to? 3 kids, no, older than 8 or 9, were standing directly in the center of the road. They are no longer there, but I had to swerve to escape them. Jake, are you certain about that? It's raining heavily outside. It's not really visible. Jake took another glance around. The curve was obscured by mist from the valley below, and the rain was now falling very heavily. I am aware of what I observed. 3 children standing directly in the road in their nightgowns. I nearly ran over the railing attempting to dodge them. When I get there, I'll keep an eye out. Do you call the police? Jake thought about it. What was he going to tell them? That he had observed 3 kids who had disappeared into thin air? Yes, I will give them a call. There's a problem here. The West Virginia State Police dispatcher took Jake's information, but he contacted 911 on his satellite phone. After being sent to the location, Trooper David Chen showed up 20 minutes later. He and Jake looked everywhere, but there were no kids in the vicinity. Trooper Chen said it might have been deer. They can occasionally resemble persons in the dark and rain, especially to a weary driver. Jake answered, I've been driving these mountains for 12 years. I am aware of the distinction between children and deer. These were children standing straight up in the street. dressed in white pajamas. Though he didn't seem persuaded, Trooper Chen noted it in his report. "Tonight, we'll monitor this location. We'll locate any children who could be out here." However, Jake suspected they would find nothing. He couldn't get the image of those 3 kids standing in his headlights, their eyes reflecting the light with an uncanny intensity, out of his mind as he drove away from Dead Man's Curve. He hadn't noticed it until now, but there had been a problem with their looks. They had appeared to flawless, to quiet, and to pale. Jake began questioning other drivers about Dead Man's Curve at a truck stop in Beckley the following morning. A couple of them murmured something that chilled Jake's blood, but the most were aware of the accidents. "You see those kids, too?" inquired Bobby Fletcher, an old-timer. "I've seen them at least a dozen times in the 30 years that I've been driving this road. The same 3 kids every time. In the same place every time. Always dress in white. You've already seen them. The first time occurred in 1992. Like you, I almost died attempting to dodge them. Went straight into the trees and off the road. They were gone when I went outside to see how they were doing. Nothing. No footprints. Jake was ill." "Have other drivers noticed them? More than you could imagine?" "I keep track, but most don't talk about it for fear of being labeled crazy. Over the years, I've spoken with at least 20 drivers who have experienced the same thing. Avoiding those kids almost caused them all to crash." Bobby reached into his glove compartment and took out a battered notebook. "On my 3rd sighting, I began to keep a log, everything, timings, dates, and weather." "Are you curious about something intriguing? All of the sightings occur between 11:30 p.m. as well as midnight, and it always happens in inclement weather. No matter what rain, snow, fog, it never happens on a clear night." Jake read the notes Bobby had left. The same thing was detailed in each entry. Drivers swerved and almost crashed because of 3 kids in white nightgowns standing in the road at the deceased man's curb. In fact, a few drivers had crossed the guardrail and suffered fatalities or severe injuries. "Bobby, do you believe that these children could be related to the mishaps?" As if they were attempting to alert drivers to something, Bobby's face became serious. "For a long, I also had that opinion, but after learning more about Dead Man's Curve's past, I had a change of heart." He produced a folder containing photocopied articles and newspaper clippings from local publications as far back as the 1980s. Take a look at this 1987 one. "Automobile accident near Dead Man's Curve claimed the lives of a family of 5, 3 children, ages 7, 8, and 9, and their parents. Automobile slid into a gully after going off the road during a downpour." Jake perused the article. The family Hendricks had been operating a vehicle. Their automobile went off the road and fell into the ravine while they were returning home from a church session. The 5 members of the family were all slaughtered at once. The kids were said to be dressed in their Sunday attire, which would have included a white shirt for the boy and white dresses for the girls. Just 2 months after this accident, the first sighting of the children was reported, Bobby added. Additionally, each and every driver who has witnessed them says the same thing. 3 children in white, all of the appropriate ages. They appear to be the children of the Hendricks. However, why would they want to cause mishaps? They're not attempting to cause mishaps, in my opinion. I believe they are attempting to seek assistance. They continue to stand in the road because they are unaware that they are dead, wishing someone would pause and assist them. However, like the Ricks family, cars who swerve to escape them wind up falling off the cliff. A shiver went down Jake's back. You're stating that they repeatedly caused the same accident that killed them. At Dead Man's Curve, I've counted at least 15 collisions when vehicles swerved to avoid an object in the road that wasn't there when the cops arrived. Jake had trouble sleeping that night. He couldn't stop thinking about the 3 kids and the fear in their eyes as his truck pounded them. If Bobby was correct, they stood in the road where they perished, caught in a never-ending cycle, and other families had to endure the same outcome. Jake made the decision to conduct his own study. He visited the Somersville Library and researched the Hendricks family in any way he could, since it had been one of the biggest incidents in the history of the area. It received a lot of newspaper coverage. Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer Ricks were the children's names. They were 7, 8, and 9 years old, respectively. The description of the accident scene was what made Jake's hands shake, even if the pictures featured 3 adorable kids with innocent eyes and bright smiles. The children's remains were recovered a few yards from the Hendricks automobile, which was reported by the police to have been located at the bottom of the ravine. Still dressed in their white church clothes, they were discovered laying together in a small clearing, being flung from the automobile during the collision. The examiner of medicine observed that there were no indications of fight or pain on the children's bodies, and they seemed to have died instantaneously. One witness said they appeared as though they were simply napping. Records of additional incidents at Dead Man's Curb that corresponded with Bobby's timeline were also discovered by Jake. When assistance arrived, drivers reported swerving to avoid youngsters on the road, but nothing was there. The trend was obvious. Only 2 months after the Ricks family's death, the sightings began, and they have continued on a regular basis ever since. However, Jake's discovery of a 2003 surveillance report was the most unsettling. Following a string of mishaps, the West Virginia Department of Transportation had motion-activated cameras installed near Dead Man's Curve. The cameras had recorded multiple incidents of cars veering sharply around the bend, but the video revealed no kids on the road. To prevent nothing, the cars were swerving. The drivers, however, all maintained that they had a clear view of the kids. They were consistent in their descriptions. 3 kids standing in the center of the road, their eyes reflecting the headlights, wearing white nightgowns. Some drivers went so far as to describe the faces of the children in detail. Details that matched the Hendricks children's newspaper images. The kids weren't only showing up for driving, Jake understood. They were selectively showing up. They were only seen to a select few, and Jake had been one of them. However, why? Why did some drivers pass through the curve without any problems, while others were vulnerable to the sightings? In an attempt to identify commonalities, he began interviewing other drivers who had witnessed the kids. He discovered something unsettling. All of the drivers who had witnessed the kids were parents. All of them had their own kids, typically about the same age as the Hendricks kids. Jake's own children are a 9-year-old boy and a 7-year-old daughter. 2 of the Hendricks children were exactly the same age. Similar circumstances were experienced by other drivers who had saw the kids. It seemed as though the deceased kids were attracted to grown drivers who would naturally want to keep kids safe, even if they were ghosts. However, the accidents were being caused by the protecting instinct. Drivers who were most inclined to swerve to avoid the youngsters would see them and end up over the guardrail, sometimes even carrying their own families. Jake began transporting a small memorial candle and pictures of the Hendricks kids in his vehicle. Every time he passed through Dead Man's Curb, he would slow down and say a prayer for the children, begging them to find peace and cease showing up to other drivers. In addition, he began alerting other truck drivers about the curb, not only because of the state of the roads, but also because of the kids. Some drivers paid attention, but most believed he was insane, and gradually, there were fewer accidents near Dead Man's Curve, but daring drivers claim that the kids continue to show up. Enough to acknowledge seeing them. They continue to wear their white nightgowns, stand in the middle of the road in inclement weather, and reflect the headlights with their naive eyes. Instead of swerving wildly, vehicles now know to slow down when they notice them. They are able to safely proceed through the curb after acknowledging the kids with a wave or a nod to let them know they have been noticed. Jake has made hundreds of trips around Dead Man's Curve. He has encountered the kids 3 more times since that night in 2019. But this time he slows down and talks to them through his windshield rather than swerving to avoid them. "I see you," he murmurs. "You must quit blocking the road, even though I understand that you are afraid and that you want to get home. Someone will be harmed by you, every time." The kids appear to pay attention. Slowly, they move away and disappear into the night as they turn to face his truck and meet his eyes through the glass. Even though Jake has never had to swerve before, he's aware of their presence, anticipating the next driver, who may not be aware of their story. The kids from Dead Man's Curve are stuck in death forever, attempting to find their way home, but only understanding how to stand at the intersection of their path. And they serve as a constant reminder that certain mishaps start their own never-ending tragedies. Furthermore, some kids never grow up. They continue to stand in the street in the hopes that someone will eventually pull over and give them directions home. 5. The Interstate 80 Phantom Convoy. Their 21 years of cross-country traveling, Ray Nighthawk Patterson had witnessed every conceivable weather, road condition, and traffic scenario. Despite 100-car pileups, tornadoes, and blizzards, the 46-year-old Sacramento truck driver had transported goods from coast to coast. However, nothing had prepared him for what transpired on February 14, 2021. During a whiteout blizzard on Interstate 80 in Wyoming, Ray was carrying a bunch of gadgets from California to Chicago, with the storm causing them to be almost 3 hours behind schedule. This snowstorm had occurred at 9:00 p.m., and the Wyoming portion of I-80 was known for abrupt weather shifts. Visibility was down to maybe 20 feet, and the wind was blowing across the plains with enough force to rock his 40-ton rig. The Ray was a seasoned winter driver, but the Wyoming Department of Transportation had issued a no needless travel recommendation. He had reduced his speed to 35 miles per hour and was navigating the whiteout by following the reflective markers on the right shoulder. He could hear other truckers on his CB radio, either crawling along like him, waiting for the storm to pass, or pulled over. The time was 11:23 p.m. when Ray's mirror lights first appeared. Behind him, 100 yards or so, were red tail lights that were just barely visible through the churning snow. Ray was not taken aback. Using the lead truck's tail lights as a guide, other truckers frequently followed one another through inclement weather. But as the minutes went by, Ray became aware of an oddity. Behind him, the lights were in perfect alignment, as though several trucks were following in a straight line. At least 6 sets of tail lights, all keeping precisely the same distance from his truck and from each other, were visible to him. Ray reached for his CB. "This is Nighthawk, westbound I-80 near mile marker 215 breaker 119. I have a convoy behind me, but the radio is silent. Come back, you guys back there." The cab was filled with static. Ray awaited a reply, but it never arrived. He tried again. "Convoy at my rear. It's Nighthawk here. Are you all going quiet or what?" Amid order to stay awake amid this confusion, some conversation would be helpful. Nothing has changed. Ray took another look at his mirrors. The flawless formation of the 6 sets of taillights remained intact. However, the lights themselves had a problem. They appeared to be shining from within and were excessively red and brilliant, instead of merely mirroring his headlights. In the hopes that the trucks behind him would pass, Ray reduced his speed to 25 miles per hour. However, they also decelerated while keeping the same distance. They precisely matched his pace when he accelerated to 40. They appeared to be attached to his truck by unseen wires. "This is becoming strange." To himself, Ray mumbled. He gave the CB another go. "Is there any traffic heading east? This is Nighthawk, at mile marker 210, heading west. A convoy appears to be approaching you. A close formation of 6 trucks. This is Desert Storm eastbound at mile marker 195, said a crackling voice. "And I don't see anything out here. Nighthawk." Visibility is about 0. You sure you got company back there? Ray checked his mirrors. The lights were still there, still red in the snow. Good. 6 trucks were running about 100 yards behind me, and they wouldn't answer the radio. That's odd, because most drivers talk a lot in this kind of weather, so perhaps their radios aren't working. The convoy behind him instantly followed suit, their lights shifting to the right in perfect unison, and Ray cancelled his turn signal and began to move toward the shoulder, as if he was going to pull over. But Ray had never seen 6 trucks with radio issues all at once, so he decided to test something. Retreated to the middle of the lane, and the convoy trailed behind, seemingly mimicking his every step, but with a small lag that made it seem almost robotic. Desert Storm, are you still there? Ray asked into his CB. Yes, Nighthawk. What's your situation? These trucks seem to be imitating everything I do, following my every move, changing lanes when I signal, and maybe they're simply being cautious, following your lead through the storm. Ray thought about this. In his years of driving, he had never seen trucks maintain such perfect formation, especially in a blizzard, and the silence was unsettling. During bad weather, truckers always communicated via radio, sharing information about road conditions, accidents, and police activity. Ray thought he would try something more dramatic, so he pulled into the left lane and sped up to 50 miles per hour, a speed that was unusual for him. This is not normal, Ray said into his CV. These trucks are following me like they're remote controlled or something. Ray slowed down to 15 miles per hour, and the convoy followed, their lights shifting to the left lane in perfect synchronization. This is dangerous speed in these conditions. How are you feeling, Nighthawk? Perhaps the storms frightened you. Ray was beginning to wonder the same thing, but when he checked his mirrors again, he saw that the lights were still there, still glowing with that strange red intensity, and he counted them against 6 sets of tail lights in perfect alignment, maintaining precise formation until he saw something that made his blood freeze. Instead of simply following him, the lights were approaching him in quick bursts, as though the trucks were teleporting forward a few feet at a time. They were 100 yards back 1 second, 90 yards the next, 80 yards, and then 70 yards. Their gaining. Ray's voice was tight with terror as he spoke into his CB. I can't see them moving, but the convoy is getting closer. They are simply leaping ahead. My opinion is that you should stop and rest, Nighthawk. Your mind is messed up by this storm. Ray was unable to stop, though. He was now only 50 yards from the trucks behind him, and through the snow he could make out more details. Not all of the lights were red. Their pulses resembled heartbeats. Additionally, there was a problem with the truck's actual shape. They appeared to be from an other age. They were too tall and angular. There was no signal as Ray reached for his cell phone to dial 911. Dead zones were common on Wyoming's Interstate 80, and the storm was likely affecting the towers anyhow. He was alone. Now that the convoy was 30 yards behind him, Ray could see the truck silhouettes through the snow. They were vintage rigs, most likely from the 1970s or 1980s, with long hoods and high rectangular cabs, but they were in excellent shape. No road grime, no weathering, no rust. They appeared as though they had just been taken from the manufacturing floor. This isn't real, Ray told himself. This isn't possible. However, there was no denying the presence of lights in his mirrors, and they were approaching. 20 yards, 15, 10. Ray could now see that the trucks were devoid of any form of identifying signs, including corporate logos and identification plates. Like mechanical ghosts, they were merely faceless rigs that followed him through the storm. Ray could see into the lead truck's cabs at 5 yards. A figure in a trucker's cap and a bulky winter coat filled the driver's seat, but Ray was unable to identify any of its features. The guy stared straight ahead, hands on the steering wheel, motionless. It never turned its head, never moved, and never shown any signs of life. Ray pressed down on the accelerator, forcing his truck in the blizzard at unsafe speeds. The convoy kept their 5-way gap, easily matching his speed. Now Ray could hear their engines, a deep rumbling that sounded like thunder rolling across the plains, coming from everywhere at once. The caravan then began to pass him, moving one truck at a time, not all at once precisely and mechanically into the left lane. Ray saw the driver clearly as the first vehicle drove up beside his cab. The figure's face was incorrect, but it was dressed like a trucker from the 1970s, complete with a denim jacket, baseball cap, and aviator sunglasses. Ray could see ice crystals developing on the sunglasses, and the skin was waxy and grey. The mouth of the figure was its breath was not fogging in the cool air, and it was hanging open. Ray became aware that he was staring at a corpse. The second truck came alongside, then the third. Every driver had the same appearance. Breathlessness, open mouth, ice crystals, and grey skin. Without noticing Ray's presence or displaying any awareness, they were all looking straight ahead. Ray shook his hands and grasped his CB. Mayday, mayday. This is Nighthawk traveling west on I-80. Dead truckers are following me. Dead truckers, I say. Please, someone answer. The air was static. Then a distorted, faint voice could be heard. I'm Nighthawk. Can you hear me? Indeed. I can hear you, yes. Who is this? The convoy commander is this person. We have been anticipating your arrival. The blood in Ray froze. The convoy was the source of the voice. He spoke to one of the dead drivers. For 40 years, we have been traveling this road. The voice went on, becoming more distinct as it waited for a companion. We continued to drive in 1981 despite the storm. We never stopped driving. In 1981, Ray recalled hearing about a huge pileup on I-80. Several drivers had been killed in a whiteout crash involving multiple trucks. Though the specifics were unclear, he believed it had occurred in this region. The voice said, "We're not dead," as though it could read his mind. When Nighthawk said, "The road never ends, just driving. Always driving, the road never ends." Ray's truck was now totally encircled by the convoy. He had 3 trucks to his left and 3 to his right, all in perfect alignment, with their ice-covered sunglasses reflecting his headlights. The deceased driver's grey faces were now turned toward his taxi, and they were all staring at him. "Join us," said the voice. "Get out of your truck and pull over. The cold won't harm you. When you're driving forever, nothing hurts." Ray became aware of what was going on. He was being recruited by the convoy in an attempt to join them on their never-ending trek. For all eternity, he would be just another grey-faced motorist, gazing straight ahead and travelling the same path. Ray said into his CB, "No, I will not accompany you. I'm still alive. You will be," said the voice. "Just as the storm took us, it will take you. However, you don't have to pass away alone. Come along with our convoy. Join us for a lifetime of driving." Ray was forced to the shoulder as the truck started to close in. Through the snow and into the blackness of the Wyoming plains beyond, he could see the guardrail drawing closer. He would perish from exposure in a matter of hours if he were to leave the road in these conditions. But Ray thought of something. He recalled a story about ghosts that his grandfather had told him. The laws of their own era confined them. They might have been trapped in 1981 technology if the convoy had perished in 1981. Ray grabbed his CB and changed to the normal trucker station, number 19. He then changed to Channel 9, which was the emergency channel that was most popular in the 1980s. He had witnessed it in vintage films and television series. Breaker 9. This is Nighthawk calling for help in an emergency. I was in a predicament on I-80 heading west, 200th mile marker. Suddenly, the engines of the convoy became louder and more violent. The deceased driver's jaws widened, revealing blackened teeth as they turned to face Ray's cab. "This is the Wyoming Highway Patrol dispatcher for Breaker 9. We have a copy of your urgent call. What's up with you, Nighthawk? Ray was unsure if the person was a dispatcher or perhaps a member of the occurrence, but he was complicit. I have unauthorized vehicles following me. Ask for help right now. Nighthawk, copy that. Units are being sent to your location. Are you able to stay in your current role? No. I'm being forced off the road by the cars. I get it. Units are en route. Avoid interacting with the unapproved cars. Again, don't participate. Ray's own cab looked to be the source of the loud boom coming from the convoy's motors. The deceased drivers were getting closer, their tongues moving in mute screams, their faces pressed against their windows. Then all of a sudden there was silence. Ray was by himself on the highway when the convoy vanished and the engines stopped. The wind had subsided, and he could see farther than before, but the snow was still falling. Ray checked himself in the mirror. Nothing. There were only his own tire tracks in the snow on the deserted road behind him. Reaching for his CB, he returned to Channel 19. Is there any traffic outside? It's Nighthawk here. Anyone else experience anything weird on I-80 tonight? A voice responded right away. This is Desert Storm, eastbound at mile marker 180. Nighthawk, you disappeared off our radar approximately an hour ago. We've been trying to reach you. Where have you been? Ray looked at his clock. It was 1:47 a.m. He'd lost roughly 2 hours, but it had felt like only minutes. I don't know. I was dealing with a convoy that was following me. What convoy? I've been monitoring this channel all night, and you're the only westbound traffic I've heard from. Ray spent the remainder of the night trying to make sense of what had transpired. He'd lost 2 hours of time, but his truck's odometer showed he'd traveled the correct distance. He'd used the correct amount of fuel. Everything was normal except for the missing time and the recollection of the deceased truckers. When Ray reached Salt Lake City the next morning, he started studying the 1981 disaster. He located a newspaper archive that detailed the crash. 6 trucks had been engaged in a multi-vehicle pileup during a blizzard on February 14, 1981, exactly 40 years to the day before Ray's encounter. All 6 drivers had died from exposure when their trucks drove off the road. The drivers' names were mentioned in the article along with their photographs. Ray recognized them immediately. They were the same grey faces he'd seen in the caravan, sans the ice crystals and the death pal. But the most troubling revelation came in the accident report. The convoy had been going westbound on I-80 at approximately 11:23 p.m. when they encountered the blizzard. They'd been following a lead vehicle that had somehow disappeared from the scene, leaving the convoy to crash into each other in the whiteout circumstances. Ray recognized that he might have been the lead truck they'd been pursuing all along. Somehow, his presence on the anniversary of their death had pulled them back to the road, and they'd been trying to accomplish their last voyage by accompanying him into the storm. Ray never drove I-80 through Wyoming on February 14th again. He always arranged his travels to avoid that section of roadway on the anniversary of the disaster. But other trucks have had similar incidents. Convoys of antique trucks following them during winter storms, always retaining excellent shape, always driven by figures who don't reply to radio calls. The Wyoming Department of Transportation doesn't officially accept these reports, but veteran dispatchers know to pay close attention to lone truckers going westbound on I-80 during winter storms. They've learned to stay in radio touch with drivers who report strange convoy activity, and they've devised a process for addressing. Ray still drives cross-country, but he's added a new ritual to his routine. Every time he reaches mile marker 200 on I-80, he says a prayer for the 6 drivers who perished in 1981. He asks them to find calm, to stop driving, to finally reach their destination. And sometimes on bright nights, when the wind is calm, he thinks he can hear their engines in the distance, still roaring across the Wyoming plains, still following the same route they were going when the storm took them 40 years ago. The Phantom Convoy is still out there, according to truckers bold enough to report their encounters. They're still maintaining immaculate formation, still following lead trucks through winter storms, still striving to complete a journey that ended in death and ice on a February night in 1981. And every time a trucker sees them, they're reminded that certain roads never finish, some journeys never reach their destination, and some drivers never get to go home. They just keep driving, into the rain forever and ever, mile after interminable mile. 6. The screaming engine of Mile 77 Eddie freight train. Russo had been driving the nightly shift on Interstate 5 through California's Central Valley for 8 years, and he thought he knew every sound a diesel engine could make. The 41-year-old trucker from Fresno had hauled everything from fruit to machines up and down the state, listening to engines purr, growl, and we through hundreds of thousands of miles, but nothing had prepared him for what he heard near mile marker 77 on a misty October night in 2020. It was to 15 a.m. when Eddie first heard it over his own engine roar. A high-pitched screeching sound, like metal tearing apart under intense stress. It was coming from someplace behind him, but when he checked his mirrors, the southbound lanes were vacant. The fog was dense enough that visibility was down to around 30 feet. But he should have been able to see headlights if another truck was back there. Eddie grabbed his CB radio. Breaker 119. This is freight train southbound I-5 at mile marker 78. Anyone else hearing that screaming sound? The cab was silent for a few seconds before someone spoke. This is Valley Runner, approximately 5 miles behind you. Eddie, what shrieking sound you talking about? Sounds like an engine in distress, maybe. A blown turbo or seized pistons, real high-pitched, like metal screaming. It's been going on for approximately 2 minutes now. I don't hear nothing weird back here. You sure it's not your own rig? Eddie listened to his own engine. It was running smooth, the diesel purring with its usual cadence, but the screaming was getting louder, more fierce, like whatever was creating it was getting closer. Definitely not mine. This sound is coming from behind me, but I can't see any lights. Fog's really thick tonight. Maybe someone's experiencing problems, and their headlights are out. Eddie slowed down to 50 miles per hour, thinking the stricken vehicle would pass him, but when he slowed speed, the screaming got more louder, as if the source was matching his pace. It was now so loud that it was drowning out his own engine noise, a metallic shriek that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. Then Eddie saw something in his passenger mirror that made his blood freeze. A faint orange glow was visible through the fog, throbbing and flashing like flames. But it wasn't the steady glow of headlights or the red flash of emergency lights. This was something else entirely. Valley Runner, I'm seeing some kind of orange light behind me. Looks like it might be a fire. A fire. You want me to call 911? Yeah, better safe than sorry, but I'm going to check it out first. Eddie pulled over to the shoulder and grabbed his flashlight. The shrieking was now so loud, it was literally unpleasant, like standing next to a jet engine. He strolled to the back of his trailer and shined his light into the fog. What he saw defies understanding. About 50 yards behind his truck, a gigantic shape was moving through the fog. It looked like a scimitar, but it was wrong in every manner. The cab was too tall, the proportions were incorrect, and the entire car was shining with that orange light. But most unnerving of all was the source of the screams. The truck's engine was entirely exposed, its hood torn away, and the motor was running at inconceivable RPMs while literally on fire. Eddie could see pistons rotating so quickly they were just a blur, and flames were pouring out of every opening in the engine block. The truck was driving itself with no visible driver, and it was heading right for Eddie's position. Eddie hurried back to his cab and slammed the throttle, his heart racing as he pulled back onto the highway. But no matter how fast he drove, the shrieking engine kept exactly 50 YD behind him. The fog made it tough to see the vehicle properly, but that orange glow was always there, throbbing through the mist like a mechanical heart. "Valley Runner, you still there?" "Yeah, Eddie. What's your situation?" "I'm being chased by some kind of burning truck. The engine's on fire, yet it's still going. I can't see a driver, and it's following my speed exactly." "Eddie, that don't make sense. Engines don't run when they're on fire. They seize up. I know what I'm seeing. This thing's engine is screaming like a banshee, spraying flames everywhere, and it's following me down the highway." Eddie raced to outrun the burning truck, pushing his speed up to 70 miles per hour in the heavy fog. But the shrieking engine kept just behind him, never getting closer, but never dropping back. The sound was now so strong that Eddie could feel it in his bones, a vibration that appeared to be tearing apart his own soul. Then Valley Runner's voice came through the CB, and he sounded worried. "Eddie, I just crossed mile marker 77. There's something burning on the shoulder here. Looks like Jesus. It looks like a truck that's been in a horrible collision." "What kind of truck?" "Hard to tell. It's pretty burned up." "But Eddie, this looks like it happened a while ago. The metal's all rusted, and there's plants growing through the ruins. This ain't fresh." Eddie felt a cold run down his spine. "Mile marker 77. I passed that around 10 minutes ago. There was nothing there. Well, there's something here now. And Eddie, I can hear the screaming sound you were talking about. It's coming from the ruins." Eddie gazed in his mirrors. The orange glow was still there, but it seemed to be fading. The shrieking was getting quieter, more distant. "Valley Runner, is the wreckage still making noise?" "Yeah, but it's dying down. Whatever's left of the engine is finally giving up the ghost." As Valley Runner spoke, the screaming behind Eddie faded to nothing, and the orange glow disappeared into the fog. Eddie was alone on the highway again, but he was shivering so severely he could scarcely handle the steering wheel. The next morning, Eddie drove back to mile marker 77 in daylight. There was nothing on the shoulder. No wreckage, no fire marks, no trace that anything had ever happened there. But when he asked around at truck stops, he heard that other drivers had reported similar events at that identical place. An old-timer named Pete Garrison informed Eddie about a deadly accident that had occurred at mile marker 77 in 1994. Driver called Carlos Mendoza was hauling a load of chemicals when his engine caught fire. Pete claimed he tried to keep driving to get to a safe area to pull over, but the fire spread so rapidly. His truck drove off the road and exploded. They found him still behind the wheel, charred beyond recognition. Eddie studied the accident and found newspaper clippings confirming Pete's story. Carlos Mendoza had been driving southbound on I-5 when his engine fire forced him to lose control. Witnesses described hearing his engine screaming at inconceivable epimeas as he battled to maintain control. The truck had burnt 4 hours before firefighters could extinguish the blaze. But the most troubling revelation came in the accident report. Carlos had continued driving for about 2 miles after his engine took fire. His truck leaves a trail of flames and burning oil on the roadway. Witnesses stated they could hear his engine screaming from kilometers away, a sound they would never forget. Eddie recognized that he had observed Carlos Mendoza's ultimate journey, repeated continuously every foggy night on Interstate 5. The dead trucker was still trying to reach safety, still straining to control his blazing rig, still screaming down the highway with an engine that should have died decades ago. Since that night, Eddie has driven past mile marker 77 hundreds of times, but he's only heard the screaming engine 3 more times. Each meeting follows the same pattern: thick fog, the sound of an engine in difficulty, and the orange glow of a truck that's been burning for almost 25 years. And each time, Eddie says a prayer for Carlos Mendoza, hoping the dead trucker may finally find the safe haven he was yearning for on that tragic night in 1994. 7 The way station that never closes. Marcus Steel Wheels had been driving the southeastern routes for 16 years, and he knew every way station between Atlanta and Miami like the back of his hand. The 44-year-old trucker from Birmingham had been taken into scales more times than he could count, dealing with DOT inspectors who ranged from courteous to downright angry, but nothing had prepared him for what happened at the abandoned way station on Highway 301 in South Carolina. During a muggy August night in 2021, Marcus was transporting auto parts from Tennessee to Jacksonville, going roughly an hour ahead of schedule thanks to little traffic. The time was 3:47 a.m. until he spotted the green light of the way station ahead, blazing through the thick summer fog that had blown in from the swamps. He'd driven this route thousands of times, but he couldn't remember a way station at this point. The computerized sign stated, "All trucks must enter," in bright orange letters, and the scale house was illuminated up like it was the middle of the day. Marcus sighed and turned into the right lane, following the painted arrows toward the scales. He'd rather get the inspection over with than risk a fine for circumventing a necessary way station. But when Marcus reached the scale platform, something seemed strange. The building seemed old, considerably older than the contemporary way stations he was used to. The architecture was from the 1960s or 1970s with that institutional brick design that reminded him of old government buildings, and there were no other trucks around, which was uncommon for a busy roadway like 301. Marcus rolled his pickup onto the scales and waited for the green light to proceed. But instead of the typical automated system, a voice came over the intercom speaker. It was scratchy and distorted like an old radio transmission. "Driver, please shut off your engine and go to the office for inspection." Marcus gazed at the scale house. Through the windows, he could see a guy in what seemed like a DOT uniform, but the details were obscure in the fog. He cut off his engine and collected his logbook, license, and registration. The office door was sturdy oak with frosted glass, the kind they used to place in government buildings decades ago. Marcus pushed it open and walked inside. The air was thick and musty, smelled of old paper and stale cigarettes. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly green tint over everything. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s, wearing a DOT inspector's uniform, but something was wrong with his appearance. His complexion looked pale and waxy, and his eyes were bloodshot and sunken. His uniform looked authentic, but faded, as if it had been worn 4 years without cleaning. "License and registration," the inspector stated in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Marcus gave over his documents. The inspector examined them over with motions that appeared too slow, too deliberate. His fingers were strangely long and slender, and his nails were yellow and brittle. "Marcus Johnson," the inspector read from the license. "Birmingham, Alabama, driving for Southeastern Freight." He gazed up at Marcus with those terrible hollow eyes. "You're overweight. I scaled out at 78,000 pounds in Nashville. That's substantially under the limit." The inspector grinned, displaying teeth that were discolored and decaying. "Not your truck, Mr. Johnson. You're carrying too much weight." Marcus felt a cold run down his spine. "I don't comprehend." "Guilt, Mr. Johnson. Regret, shame. You're carrying too much emotional weight, and it's impacting your driving." The inspector's voice was getting deeper, more distorted. "I'm going to have to impound your truck until you can lighten your load." "That's not how way stations work. You can't impound a truck for emotional baggage." The inspector stood up and Marcus noticed. He was extraordinarily tall, at least 7 feet. His outfit was bulging at the seams and his arms were too lengthy for his physique. "This is my way station, Mr. Johnson. I decide what's too heavy to be on the road." Marcus backed toward the door, but it had disappeared. The wall behind him was solid masonry with no door or windows. The office was getting smaller, the walls closing in with each second. "You sorted that family in Tennessee," the inspector added, his voice now a hollow whisper. 3 years ago, you fell asleep at the wheel and crossed the middle line. Woman and 2 children, dead because you were too exhausted to stop driving. Marcus felt his knees grow weak. The accident in Tennessee was something he tried to forget, something he'd never talked about with anyone. The investigation had absolved him of any wrongdoing. Black Ice was blamed for the disaster. But Marcus knew the truth. He'd been driving for 18 hours straight, straining to stay awake when he wandered across the yellow line. I was cleared of all charges, Marcus muttered. Charges, yes, but not guilt. You carry their deaths with you every day, don't you, Mr. Johnson? You see their faces in your mirrors. Hear their screams in your engine roar. That's weight, Mr. Johnson, emotional weight that makes you unsafe on the road. The inspector was now standing squarely in front of Marcus, his face inches away. His breath smelled like decay and engine oil. You can't go until you're perfectly balanced, until you've paid the weight penalty. Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he was back in his truck. The engine was running and he was parked on the scale platform. The fog had lifted and he could see that the way station was completely abandoned. The windows were boarded up. Weeds were growing through cracks in the pavement and rust stains covered the old brick building. Marcus grabbed his CB radio with shaking hands. Breaker 119. This is Steel Wheels southbound 301 at mile marker 47. Anyone know anything about this old way station? A voice reacted instantly. This is Gator Bait northbound, approximately 10 miles ahead of you. What way station you talking about? Steel Wheels. There ain't no active scales on that stretch of 301. There's an old brick building here with scale platforms. Looks like it's been abandoned 4 years. Oh, that place. Yeah, there's the old Clarendon station. Been closed since the early 1980s. But Steel Wheels, you didn't try to go in there, did you? Marcus felt his throat tighten. Why? That location has a nasty reputation. Drivers used to report strange things happening there, even when it was working. Inspector named Harold Briggs worked there for 20 years. Real hard case, they say would find violations where there weren't any, make drivers sit 4 hours for no reason. Then one night in 1982, they found him dead at his desk. Heart attack, they said. But his face was twisted up like he'd seen something terrible. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What happened to the station after that? They tried to keep it open with different inspectors, but none of them would stay. All reported the same thing. Feeling like they were being watched. Hearing voices in the office. Equipment malfunctioning. DOT finally closed it down in 1983. But drivers still report seeing lights in the building at night. And some say they've been pulled in for inspections by a dead man. Marcus realized he wasn't the first driver to encounter Harold Briggs. The dead inspector was still working his ship, still pulling trucks over 4 violations that existed only in his twisted mind. And he was particularly drawn to drivers who carried the kind of guilt that Marcus had been living with for 3 years. Gator Bait. Have you ever been stopped in there? Once around 5 years ago. Same thing you probably experienced. Lights on, inspector, in the office, full 9 yards. But when I got out of my truck, I sensed something terrible in the air, something that wanted to hurt me. I got back in my rig and drove away, and I ain't never going back. Marcus stared at the abandoned structure one more time. Through one of the boarded windows, he could see a small light flickering, and he knew Harold Briggs was still in there, waiting for the next guilty driver to pull onto his scales. Marcus put his truck in gear and drove away, but he knew he'd be back. The shame he carried from the Tennessee accident was like a beacon appealing to the dead inspector. And until Marcus found a way to forgive himself, Harold Briggs would keep pulling him over, keep trying to collect the weight penalty that Marcus had been carrying for 3 years. Other drivers have had similar encounters at the abandoned Clarendon Way station, always at night, always in the fog, always with the same message about carrying too much weight, and always with the same dead inspector, continued doing his shift 40 years after his death, still trying to keep hazardous drivers off the road by gathering the guilt that makes them unable to drive. Marcus still drives Highway 301, but he's never been stopped into the abandoned way station again. He started seeing a counselor about the Tennessee accident, and slowly the weight of his guilt began to lighten, and as it did, the green light of Harold Briggs's way station ceased calling to him because he was finally carrying a cargo that was legal for the vote.